Great. So our last panel is going to talk about labor market changes through local partnerships. For those of you that have had presentations from folks that are interested in labor market data, they only have 1,500 slides to go through in the next 90 minutes. So, is that right, Scott? No. No, I'm looking forward to this discussion. This is really a growing area. It is a undervalued area when it comes to workforce development, is to really look at labor market changes in the area and figure out how to tie that back to things that need to be done. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. It's great to have back with us Randy Eberts, who is another Michigonian from Kalamazoo with the Upjohn Institute. So looking forward to it. So I'll turn it over to Randy. Let's give him a warm welcome.
Well, thanks, Scott. Certainly a pleasure to be here and be on a panel that talks about partnerships. We've heard, I think, a lot about partnerships today, and we're going to focus on that explicitly in this last session of the afternoon. So we're first going to start out with a presentation that gives us a little bit of perspective, something to respond to for the rest of the panelists. And that presentation will be done by Tor Hatlevol, who's the labor market economist at the Swedish Association of Local Authorities and Regions. So he'll be focusing on the Swedish situation, but as you can all tell very quickly that I think we all share the same issues that Sweden shares, maybe not quite the same solutions, but the same issues, and so we'll figure out how, or we'll be told how Sweden is trying to address some of those issues. The other panelists include Tracy Carey. She's Executive Director of the Midwest Consortium, which includes many of the largest cities in the Midwest, including Chicago and Milwaukee, and she'll tell you about all the rest. There's a number of them there. And then Scott Powell, who is from Michigan. He's the Research Director of the Bureau of Labor Market Information and Strategic Initiatives, and he'll be talking about some of the things that's happening in Michigan, which are pretty exciting. Also because we're partnering with him on a few things, so they're really exciting. And then we have, I'm going to butcher this one, but Alejandra, all right, Matoya Boyer, who's from the National Association of Counties, and as you will soon figure out that most of the WIBs, we have about 500 plus WIBs, Workforce Investment Boards in the United States. Most of those are defined by county boundaries. There's a few that are within cities, but by county boundaries. And so what that means is that so many of our partnerships are within these counties or just across a number of very small number of counties. So we'll hear more about some of those partnerships. And then Peter Kretikos, who's President and Executive Director of the Institute for Work and the Economy, will be talking about some of the initiatives that he's been involved in as well. Now, all this is really related to our current federal program of workforce assistance, and that's called the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, WIOA, that we've heard about in many of the sessions today. And WIOA is a kind of a evolution of what's happened from JTPA to WIA, which was the Workforce Investment Act. JTPA was the Job Training and JTP Partnership Act. And partnership is one of the words we're talking about for this group. And so what we're going to be focusing on is how WIOA is trying to form these partnerships. Now, WIOA has a number of different legislative requirements, and one is that they have to have job centers, okay, American job centers, and these are places in which people go to receive a whole variety of services. And the services are things that range from resume writing to assistance with, job search assistance, all the way to training, okay? And so what this means is that it's not just the job seeker that's involved in this endeavor, but it's also the business people as well. In probably the middle part to the latter part of WIA, there was a much greater emphasis during that time of the employer as a customer. So now under WIOA we have a two-customer a dual customer system. Both the job seeker and the employer are both represented with services at the one-stop centers, and these are administered by the workforce investment boards. And so with that, we have also I think there are 9 mandatory partnerships, right? And you can even add to that. Mandatory partners are employment service, TIAA, which is the trade assistance program that we have. You can go down the list of all these things. And so you can see that within the programmatic environment, landscape, we have a greater sense of partnership than what we had before. There's even the case in which you can actually use dollars from one of the programs to help fund the other program if you feel that in your particular local area that you need more funding for, let's say, lower income workers than displaced workers or vice versa. So there's fungibility there as well. Anyway, a lot of possibilities, but since we have 500 of these workforce investment boards, each one really approaches this in a slightly different way. And the potential to bring in not only the federal dollars and state dollars, that is the public dollars, but also to bring in foundation dollars and of course the business consortiums and the whole business community is quite fascinating. And so we'll learn more about that. So enough of my speech. I'll turn it over to Tor to talk about the Swedish situation, and then we'll have the panelists respond to that.
Thank you, Randall. And now we come to the 1500 slides about Sweden. No, just kidding. It's just about 10 slides. It's great to be here. Thank you for the invitation. And it's been very interesting to hear the discussions earlier today and see the problems that are quite similar, but some of the solutions are different. Some short on the Swedish Association of Local Authorities, or SALAR for short. We are a members organization organizing all the Swedish municipalities, which are 290, and all the Swedish regions, which are 21. And we also are the employers organization for everyone employed in the region or in a municipality. We're a central organization, so we represent among 22 to 23% of the Swedish labor market as an employers organization. We do the central collective bargaining, then our members can do local or regional collective bargaining. On top of that, bargaining is being made on a central level. I will start with just going through the situation in the Swedish labor market and what difficulties and challenges we are facing. And despite the long period with the economic growth, we have seen a large polarization in the labor market. On one hand, we see more and more employers announcing that they have hard to find the right skills, the right competencies, and it takes longer time to recruit. On the other hand, we have a quite relatively high unemployment rate, which bottom out around 6% in the end of 2018 and beginning of 2019. And if you look at the unemployed, most of them are low educated, which means that they have not a secondary degree. They're newly arrived immigrants, especially from Syria and the Middle East, coming 2015 and 14. And then we also have people with different kind of disabilities which have a hard time to get into the labor market. But the Swedish labor market is, if you don't have a secondary degree or high school diploma, it's very hard for you to get a job. That's most the basic line, and has been for the last 20 years. We also have demographic changes that are creating a lot of challenges. A lot of statisticians and economists have warned for this situation about 20 years, and now we're starting to see that the population is getting older, and relatively measures that we see that the workforce population are decreasing in some countries, and we see large regional differences in that. These slides just show the bars of all 21 regions, and The yellow bar shows the forecast in changes in the working age groups up to 19 between 2018 and 2028. The blue bar shows the changes in the age group 20 to 64, the working age population, and the red lines bars shows the changes in population over 80. So you can see we have severe challenges, and 8 regions actually have a decreasing workforce population during in this period. And already it is today in some municipalities in the rural areas, even if the municipality should recruit everyone graduating from high school, that wouldn't be enough to fill all the vacancies that needed to replace those who are retired, but also to fill in the more needs for with a high population that comes with elderly care and so forth. A lot of people think that technology could be one solution to this problem, demographic problem. More use of technology could decrease the use of manpower or man hours. But even if you get more technology into the so-called low-tech sectors, as the service sector and public sector, there are some obstacles to meet that. And studies from the OECD, from the PX studies, where they measure some skills in the working age population, shows among ICT shows that we have challenges when it comes to technology knowledges. Here they have divided into 3 groups, where category 1 is, or level 1 is no ICT skills or just basic, and 2 and 3 are the good or very good skills in ICT. And you see, Sweden come out very well in the number and the share of in the labor force who has level 2 and 3. We're the best among the OECD countries, but we still have 50% of the workforce at level 1. So just investing in new technology in a broader base would mean that we also have to invest in upskilling and upgrading people's skills to use this technology. And at the moment we don't have an infrastructure to meet all these new demands. But we have to do it, and we have to see how to create new ways of lifelong learning and create a new infrastructure for this. When it comes to what's being done to meet these measures, we have different responsibilities for different policy areas. The municipalities are responsible for elderly care, education, child care, social welfare, and then we have the regions responsible for healthcare and public transport, and the state, among other things, labor market policy, social insurance, and so forth. And what we see that some of these policy areas need to meet and work together. That makes it quite hard sometimes when you have all these different levels that should work together, and who will be responsible for what in what time of the process. We see that, especially when it comes to labor market policy, the local cooperation between municipalities and the public employment services, sometimes it works very well and has been very well functioning, mostly due to relations between people working in different organizations at a local level. So it's more personalized, based on personal relations than formal relations. In 2015, we started a new program from the government to actually improve and formalize the cooperations between the local levels, municipalities, and the public employment services on a more structural base. And it has improved, but it goes quite slowly. One challenge we see also is that in Sweden we have a high dropout rate from the secondary education. Among every cohort, it's like about 25 to 30% who is dropping out of the secondary education. That creates a huge problem, especially when it comes to, as I said before, to enter the labor market, you need a secondary degree to actually could get a job. in 2011, the European Social Fund granted Salar a large amount of money to start a program to prevent people from dropping out, but also to get those who have dropped, students who drop out, to get back to the schools. And it's worked for 3 years, and we also started a multi-level project that we worked on the national level, regional level, and a local level at the same time. Meaning that on the central level we should gather all the information and knowledge created on the local workshops, and also to conform policy. And we had 5 regions, 50 municipalities, and about 8,000 students passing through the first project, which were about between 2012 and 2015. And we had the next project starting the 2.0, 2016 to 2018. And we had a lot of good findings. It's not rocket science, but early interventions, because you can see early which students or kids are at risk of falling out due to a lot of factors. And that's what you have a holistic approach. You work with the individual in the center to see what needs each individual have for actually passing primary school, and then have the right skills or right knowledge to pass the secondary school. And it's more support and flexibility for target groups. We saw that there were different groups, either they have a period of illness, they have some disabilities, or they have social problems from home, where you can gather different cooperations and different agents to work together, and as we see, to fill in the gaps between the system, because since we have the difference in responsibility between different levels, it's sometimes hard to work on a local level together around the individual between 3 or 4 different systems with different budgets and so forth. So that's been hard, but if you do, you can do really good and get good success. And also what you can say, universal measures is to work at schools to create an environment where everyone feels included, and you also follow up results and get back to the students, so they all the time knows where they are in the knowledge skills, and to get further. What we need to do then, as I said before, investment in skill and competences. If you have to invest in technology, you have to invest in also upskilling the working staff. And one example of that is the Stockholm Digit program. Also a program funded by this European Social Fund, ended last year. It was Stockholm together with 14 municipalities around Stockholm that formed a project to start education in basic digital skills among the care workers in the elderly care, because they see that people know how to use a smartphone, but they hardly know how to start a computer, no more even not using an email program or a word program or whatever. So they're starting a basic education to learn on a broad base, and they also target some special person as ambassadors that had a more deeper education, and so that could be also a support at the workplaces. And this creates an environment where among the employees that they were not so hostile towards new technology into their daily working, and that's creating also an environment where they can take it to and use it in a better way. When it comes to finance, lifelong learning, or to see, we have quite generous system of adult learning in Sweden. If you haven't passed secondary education, you can go back as an adult for free and get that education. But if you later in life want to change career or get a new profession, it's very hard. I mean, you choose your profession when you're young and you stay there for the rest of your life, and that's quite old-fashioned. We need to find new ways of transferring and change occupations, change industry, and so forth. And to do that in midlife, when you have a family, house, and mortgages, it's quite hard because you're going to finance it. And how do you do it in between? We have a lot of education paid by employers in Sweden. An investigation from the European Social Partners showed that among 97% of all training, one day or more during a year, was financed by the employers in Sweden. But often it's short period, and if you're going to have a longer period of education for 6 months or 1 year for upgrade or get a new education or change career path, you have to have other ways to finance it. And we are discussing different ways, share the cost between the state, employers, and private. So we have a shared cost because all levels are benefiting from people to upgrade or re-educate their skills. And the third thing is to extend working life. We see that we have the demographic change. One calculation made by Sala last year is that if we could increase or delay the retirement age by 2 years, our recruitment for the next 10 years would reduce by 10%. So that to make people work longer is one issue. People live longer, so why can't they work longer? And on the other hand, the cost for pensions are increasing so much. So to finance this, you have to have people work very long. But that also means that you have to have flexible ways to solve this, especially when you have physical demanding jobs. You can't do that for 50 years, from your 20 to 67. So you have to have a flexible way, but these also include shorter or longer periods of education, training, so you can change profession during your working life, and also you can extend it in that way. And it's also a way to use the experience and knowledge within the organizations that people have created after a long working life. So that's where 3 main challenges as we see it, and most of it you have to have a solution on a local level, either within the municipalities, but also between agents or between municipalities, the state, and companies, because companies is a very important part in this. So you have to work together too. So that's what we see now. And I stop there. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Tor. That was an excellent overview of some of the issues that we're facing, and certainly provides a great platform for issues that we want to talk about here in this panel. Just to summarize a little bit, I think there were at least 3 areas that I think he was focusing on, and these are some of the themes that we've heard already today. One is the fact that employers are always complaining about not finding qualified workers. I think that's true anywhere in the world. I was in China last September, and they were complaining about it there. You go to Africa, I think people are complaining about the same thing, so it's universal. Second, we have to somehow bring the educational system into alignment with the employers in terms of what they need, as well as how do you work with the job seekers to either look for short-term or long-term solutions. Employers want short-term solutions primarily, but I think it's beneficial to everyone to think about the longer-term lifelong learning. We've heard about that today as well. Apprenticeships, as we just heard in the last panel, was a very good way to kind of bring some of these together. Another theme that I heard here is what we're really, I think what could serve us well is customized or personalized services. We sometimes have a tendency to think of one size fits all, but that's not the case. Everybody brings their own issues with them, their own challenges, as well as their own way of approaching things. And so how do we customize the services that we provide at our one-stop service centers? And I think that introduces some issues of How do we use the data that we've already collected through the administrative system, from transactional data to UI wage record data, to really become a smarter workforce system? We aren't getting any more money from the federal government or even state governments here in the United States, and I'm not sure if we're finding that true anywhere else either. And so we have to use our resources more effectively, more efficiently, and so that means being smarter about it. So I think we'll hear a little bit about that as well. So enough of me talking. Let me turn it over to the panel. And I was thinking of ways to do this systematically. I was thinking maybe we can or have people talk according to their height, but they're all sitting down, and maybe they're, you know, the alphabetical last name. But then I had a brainstorm over here. I thought, why don't we look at what they represent, maybe from the largest region, okay, cross states, to a state, down to maybe a county, and then Peter will figure out what to do with you at the end. Okay. So with that, Tracy, why don't you talk about your organization and what partnerships you have been able to form to get some of the resources you've been able to receive, as well as bring these entities together.
Thank you very much, Randall. I appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation today, and I've learned so much throughout the day, and I have so many great ideas that I can take back. And that's one of the things that I find most inspiring about working in this field, is that there are so many smart people who bring such great ideas and their practice to the table to share with others, and that's why I enjoy being here in rooms with folks like you. So thank you for having me. One of the things that I think I was probably most inspired by was this idea, and Randall, you touched on it, that the challenges and problems that we face are pretty global. I mean, we all have the same problem of social and demographic changes that are putting pressure on how we do our practice. We all have the same policy pressures that create an environment that we have to react inside of. And then we also have the practical application of those two things in the work that we do with people. And so we heard that from the experience in Sweden, and that certainly is true in the experience that I come out of. So Midwest Urban Strategies is a consortium of 13 urban workforce boards. We represent 13 of the largest cities across the Midwest. So from Wichita, Kansas, and Kansas City, Missouri, all the way over to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and everything in between, they are my members. We represent 13 cities and 9 states. It's a pretty broad cross-section, and yet what we find is that the experiences within those communities are very similar. And so when we first got started, what brought us together were a few important sort of convergences. The first was the change from WIA to WIOA, as Randall was describing. That was a significant change for local workforce boards, because it really did change how we practiced the work that we did. And it meant that we had to rethink some of the ways that we worked with others and how we saw ourselves in terms of our place in community. So that's a challenge for anybody. I hate change. Maybe you guys are all really good at it, but it's not my strength. So there was a need for us to create some crosstalk, some space for leaders in the system within our region to talk to each other. Another thing that happened was that we had some social unrest in many of our cities. So the first cities that came together included the city of Milwaukee, the city of St. Louis, and the city of Detroit. Those cities all had major events that were largely, you could point them back to just lack of opportunity within minority populations within our cities who felt disconnected from opportunity. So those workforce board directors really wanted a space to think about, how do they make their workforce system responsive to local community needs and open in a way that is welcoming and engaging. And then lastly, to the point of policy, we were living in an era where we were implementing new policy changes and trying to interpret what that all meant. And so it really gave us the opportunity and space to think about how we were implementing those changes, where things didn't make sense, and it gave us the power of a representative voice with 13 members across the region to be able to push back a little bit and say, well, can you help us understand how this might work? Because it doesn't seem to work for us. So that was sort of the foundation, the place that we started from. And from there, we quickly moved into from 3 members to 9, and then now on to 13. And we've gone from a place of really just having sort of monthly phone calls, complaining together about the challenges of our work and why do they make this so hard on us, and why do they have to make these changes? We don't like changes. To really thinking about how do we apply the work that's happening in Kansas City, in Detroit, to add value to the registered apprenticeship work that's happening in that Detroit area. And so it's changed the nature of our practice. It's helped us get deeper in the work that we do, and really given us the space to think about deepening our practice and our work, and really expanding the impact of that. And so I'm looking forward to hearing more about the data side of things, because we're just kind of getting started on really how do you look at a region and its data. So that.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tracy. Follow-up question very quickly for you, though. You were mentioning that maybe you've gotten about $20 million for the, and there must be about, I don't know how many cities, but these cities are all over the Midwest.
Yeah.
And so how do you share this? How do you go about using those resources, additional resources, for forming partnerships, or getting people at the table, whatever it might be?
Yeah, thank you. So one of the things that we've been very successful with is securing resources in competitive Department of Labor grants, as well as through philanthropic investments. And it is a challenge to take those resources and invest them into 13 different cities. And so one of the things that we've worked really hard on is developing this network that is focused on bringing folks together. We come together twice a year and have an opportunity during those times to really look at what's happening in each one of our local areas, how we're implementing the practices that we're engaged in. And generally speaking, we focus our program-related activities around very specific objectives. So things like registered apprenticeship are very much a part of the work that we do. So when we're securing resources, we're focusing those resources on activities related to work-based learning or registered apprenticeship, and then scaling from there. So we have been able to secure 4 Department of Labor grants, and all but one of our cities is participating. So we have some data systems in place that we're using to manage the collection of data, and are moving into a universal data collection system that allows us to look at how we're impacting local communities. And one of the biggest challenges that we found is getting access to those broader data systems like UI, and being able to tell a bigger story about the work that we're doing.
Well, you probably span about 5 states, right? 9 states. Okay.
Yeah.
So it is hard. Each state has to agree to give you the UI wage records. Yeah.
Yep.
So let's move on to Scott. Scott represents Michigan, one state, smaller than the regions that Tracy represents, but you also, I think, go beyond what a traditional labor market information office does by having strategic initiatives behind your name, as well as some of the projects that you're getting involved with. So maybe you can tell us some things about that.
Sure. Thanks, Randy. It's not working. Is it on?
I think it'll.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was going to ask Jacob for his, but okay. The short bureaucratic answer to what we do is we're kind of the research and evaluation arm of the state labor department, even though we're not actually in the labor department. I'm in the Department of Technology Management and Budget. But more general than that, right, we think of ourselves as focused on data and being a data partner, right? So we partner with lots of different organizations. We partner with the State Labor Department. We partner with other state departments like education. We partner with our local workforce boards, like Jacob, like the one that Upjohn houses as well, where Randy's at. We have a lot of different partners, and our goal is to help them leverage their data as a strategic asset, right? Evidence-based decision making. How can our partners use data to make better decisions? Or if I want to hijack the OECD's line about, we say better data for better policies, for better lives, right? That's the goal. So that's what we always strive to do with all of those partners. And I can say a little bit more about what those projects are like in just a second, but I mean, this panel is about partnerships, so I really want to emphasize that partnership aspect. It's really easy for data to be useless, right? So if you don't have strong partnerships, then odds are that data is not going to make the impact you want it to. And that's a two-way street, right? So it's important for me to go to our partners and say, here's the kind of things we could be working on. Would this be useful for you? It's important for the partners to come back to us and say, here's what's working and what's not working. Here's what could be useful. Right? That's a two-way street. That communication has to be open. Those partnerships are critical to the advancement of evidence-based policymaking and using that data to make better decisions. So what kind of things do we produce that help that come about? So as Randy mentioned, so we do have the LMI shop within our bureau, and on the research side of things, we do a lot of things that you might expect a good LMI shop to do, it's labor market information shop. So maybe that's research reports. So next week we'll have a report coming out on registered apprenticeship in Michigan. We help our state and local partners with planning. A lot of the things you've heard about today as far as looking at the state and local economy, what's growing, what's shrinking, what are the in-demand jobs in your area or the state overall. We do all that kind of stuff. In addition to that, though, and I think this is what Randy was getting at, where we kind of go beyond what a typical shop might do is it's our work with administrative data, our work with the data that is inside those state data systems that wasn't created for research purposes. It wasn't necessarily created for decision making. It was probably created for reporting most of the time, but it's there. And we can use it to help make decisions that improve the lives of the people in our state. And that's what we want to do with it. So to give you some examples of more along those lines, so maybe it's purely descriptive stuff. So one thing we've done, we've created an online tool. Missouri has a similar one where we've linked up education and wage records. So that means locally, at your community college, university, whatever, if you want to know, if somebody got an associate's degree in, let's say, math or computer science from a specific college, what are they making 1 year after? That's available publicly. You can look that up, right? So that's a resource both for the decision makers at that college as well as the students and parents out there if they want to participate in that kind of an education program. We have dashboards looking at our workforce programs that help our partners make decisions about, all right, maybe here's the group I'm not serving so well. Here's the group that maybe has some more barriers that we need to pay more attention to. Right? Helping to visualize that information. We do program evaluation. What programs are working, training programs in particular. And then finally, some newer exciting stuff we're working on and we're partnering with Upjohn on, Randy, as well as a local workforce board in Michigan, is looking at predictive analytics. How can we use the data that we have to better assist those on the front line that are working in our public employment service, right? What kind of services and activities are most likely to help somebody land a job and get into sustainable employment, as well as what kind of jobs are well suited for somebody given their characteristics as far as their work history and education, things like that. So we do a lot of different things. I think I'll leave it at that for now.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, I think one of the things that Scott has really brought to the table in terms of partnerships is the fact that with this data, in the past we usually just put it in a report, send it off to some higher level of government perhaps, put it on a dusty shelf and nobody ever saw it again. But now we're getting that data back down to the customer and helping that customer make a better decision. So I think that's a really good distinction that you've made there, Scott. Alejandro, the county level. Tell us about the National Association of Counties.
Yeah, so the National Association of Counties, or NACO, represents the 3,069 counties across the country. Unlike TOR in Sweden, we are not a centralized organization, and we are one of 7 member organizations that represents local government elected officials and staff. So we represent the counties. Though we do represent all 3,069, we have our membership makes up about 2,500 counties, and on our programming side we work with about 300. So there's kind of different scales with which we work. NACO kind of has three primary functions. Our biggest function is to advocate and represent local county government at the federal level with the administration and on Capitol Hill right next door. Then we serve as kind of the providers of technical assistance and programming to support solutions and learning for our county elected officials and their staff. And then we provide research and data to county governments and the more than 30,000 staffers that work on different issues kind of across a plethora of issues based on kind of what we're seeing as hot topics, as priority areas, and things like the future of work and economic shifts is definitely something that we work on. When it comes to our programming, which I lead our community and economic development around, we are trying to take a pretty holistic approach and understanding of shifts in our economy, and this is everything from globalization and trade challenges or issues to changing demographics, to the future of work and impacts of automation. We work with different kind of counties that are challenged in different ways. So for example, we work with our coal-reliant communities, particularly in the Appalachian Regional Commission, and then out in the West to work to diversify their economies. A partnership there where we're actually trying to connect communities and counties that are transitioning their economies away from the coal industry, connect and build partnerships with counties that are working on different transitioning economies. So folks that are transitioning away from manufacturing, from timber, and a lot of these challenges connect to the impacts of automation and different changes. We also work with counties kind of at different levels around education and new skilling, reskilling, upskilling, and so we're trying to take this approach where we're looking at these changes in the economy, the impact that will kind of drive changes for employers, for job seekers, for workers, but also how does that connect to our healthcare systems? How does that connect to our criminal justice systems, our transportation systems? So we take a very holistic approach to this work. We're really trying to understand what are the systematic changes, systematic approaches, and systematic solutions to this work. So that certainly does not give us easy solutions, but we are trying to target some of these broader things. And so to, kind of something that Scott was talking about around data, one of the partnerships that we're looking at, so Multnomah County, which most people know as Portland, Oregon, has created a partnership between the county and the city, local governments, and community-based organizations across the county to develop a marginalization index that takes 43 indicators, so everything from race, gender, income, to voter participation, some of unique things, so health equity factors, and they're really trying to drive data-driven and evidence-based decision-making around housing policy, education policy, and one of the things, I mentioned this to really kind of drill in that these shifts in our workforce development and the way that these are changing dynamics are extremely connected to other policy issues, and using something like data infrastructures, GIS mapping tools, all these different things to be able to connect those dots has become critical for counties. Counties have very specific authority and powers over and funding streams over very specific things. So we cannot necessarily work, in not all counties represent or have authority over education systems. And so if they can't tackle the education system, but they're seeing their residents lose job opportunities, what other systems can we tackle to ensure those opportunities? And how can we drive these decisions using data, and particularly to focus on our most marginalized members? So young people, communities of color, low-income communities, especially as we see pretty diverging patterns in our workforce. Portland and Multnomah is a great example where there's a huge booming industries. A lot of folks have great job prospects. They're making a lot of money, but it's actually a pretty disparate income situation. There's a lot of communities that are feeling left out of that. They're not having access to opportunities for workforce, for education, or for the reskilling that they'll need to maintain those jobs. And so we're really trying to tackle this from kind of a very holistic approach. And see how we can build partnerships both with across counties. So we're seeing a lot of counties develop regional partnerships or partnerships even if they're not in the same region, but partnerships between counties that are facing similar challenges or actually really different challenges. We're seeing a lot of partnerships across, mentorship relationships where counties that are really successful in finding solutions are partnering with counties that need a little bit more help. But we also partner a lot with our business communities, philanthropic sector, and then of course regional partnerships with other representatives of local government.
So you're describing what we might call the demand side, basically, looking at economic development issues and all that. And then what about the supply side in terms of working with any of the workforce programs?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first one that comes to mind is one that we are partnering Hennepin County in, which is most people know as Minneapolis. Hennepin is a large employer in the region. And they have partnered with their workforce board and local community organizations. The organization is called PPL, and for the life of me, I cannot remember what it stands for. Excuse me. And they have created a training program where, so the county was saying, we just don't have enough people to fill these jobs, kind of the point that you made earlier, that but we're seeing a huge influx of folks from, new immigrants or folks that are reentering, single moms that are reentering the employment sphere. And so there was this huge opportunity to actually train and skill folks for these county jobs. So they've partnered with their workforce boards, with PPL and several other organizations to be able to provide holistic, needs-based training for these jobs. It's still a pretty small program. I think that when we were there, I was there visiting them in September, and they had trained 228 folks for jobs, but they were providing everything from, basic skills around resume drafting, interview change, and, ESL programs, a plethora of support systems for non-traditional members of the community to actually get these well-paying jobs with huge support systems, and jobs that have career ladders. So folks aren't necessarily just getting hired as administrative assistants or, kind of those low-skilled jobs, but they're actually getting hired and then moving up that career ladder with ongoing training systems.
Yeah, those career ladders are very important, for, sort of lifelong well-being. Yeah. Now, Peter, I think you're in luck, because I think I found a way to bring you into the conversation. Go for it. Alejandro was mentioning, the broader work relation, economic development side, and your institute has work in there in the economy. So maybe you can talk about some of that and some of the other things that you're doing.
Well, that's pretty good.
How about that? Yeah,
I'm
pretty
impressed.
nice. Thank you.
So
Peter and I go back a long ways, so anyway, we can just kind of banter a little bit.
Yeah. First of all, my apologies to the people in the booths back there, because I dropped the microphone and I didn't mean to blow your eardrums out. My apologies to that. Just a brief word about what the institute is. We were established in 2000. Originally as part of Northern Illinois University, but always as a separate independent corporation, not-for-profit corporation. I currently have 18 people on my board of directors from across the U.S., very large board, and a very small staff. We designed ourselves from the very beginning as being a policy collaborative, so we always work in networks. We're probably one of the early adopters of gig work, in the sense that we have, or freelance work, in the sense that all of the people we bring in are project-based, usually independent researchers, or with universities and so forth, but also practitioners. Our entry into this field around the future of work actually begins because with a change in the words name, we think of it as many futures of work. There isn't a single future. It really does make a difference as to who you are, where you start, what your background, your gender, your race, the place you live, and so forth. So to talk about things in singular really doesn't acknowledge, frankly, the diversity of opportunities, challenges, origins, and the barriers that people encounter. Second, we've also taken an approach that looks into our name, work and the economy. We take a look at both what are the consequences of changes in the structure of work, but also in terms of what's driving those changes. And so we look at both understanding how workers need to change, adapt, what the workforce systems are that need to support them, an appreciation, especially here in the United States, that the real burden of education and training is individually held by people in the workforce. The government's expenditure, the businesses' expenditures, frankly, pale in comparison to the amount of money that people and the risk that people are undertaking for themselves, and that we have to appreciate that and figure out how to support that. But we also are looking at what are the factors that are driving these changes. So, for instance, you take a look at Germany. Germany has adopted a very aggressive policy with respect to embracing technology and encouraging the use of technologies that augment what people do. Whereas here in the United States, it's much more in line with thinking about uses of technologies that replace what people do. And those come from very different business models and different appreciations. We also heard from our guests from Switzerland today, which I thought was intriguing because very much so the business investment in apprenticeships is one where it's a collective process and it's collectively embraced by businesses. It's also an activity that begins in secondary school, whereas in the US and Canada and a few other industrial countries, we don't start apprenticeships until after secondary school. And the engagement is much more of a transaction between business and those who are doing supporting the apprentices. So those are the kinds of issues that we're looking at and we're trying to address. And we're trying to do this at a local level. We have a new initiative that we're starting called Achieving the Promise of Work, which is very much involved in working at a community by community level that looks to try to understand what are the structural changes that are occurring, and then how does the community begin to address that, both in terms of, again, the training side of it, but also pushing back on the business models as well. What I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about in the context of this particular panel, though, is that we've heard a lot all day about sort of the official responses, the governmental systems that are in place and the associations that are in place to engage people in these transitions and in looking towards the futures of work. There is a very large cadre, numbering, I'm sure, in the thousands, of non-governmental organizations. And frankly, in the United States, we will call them often grassroots organizations. I don't know how that would translate necessarily in other cultures or other places. Because NGO sometimes gives the appearance of a greater formality than what they actually involve. And these are organizations that come about within communities in response to or addressing matters of oftentimes populations that are either underserved or not served at all. And so, for instance, we have an organization in Chicago that is very successful, long-standing organization that is involved in bringing women into construction trades, and it's called Chicago Women in Trades. And it's an organization that has a very robust apprenticeship program that is specifically targeted at bringing women into the construction industry. There's another organization in Chicago, St. Paul Ministries, that is looking very much at developing pathways through pre-apprenticeships into in apprenticeable trades, again in construction, for communities that are traditionally significantly underrepresented, which are in Chicago in construction. And Chicago is the African American community. And so they have developed a process for engaging youth, African American youth, in their communities and helping them move into and be able to qualify for construction trades. So these are organizations that are trusted partners in the community. They are the ones that work on the ground, that are responsive to community needs. Unfortunately, they also operate in silos and often in competition for resources. Resources for these organizations are slim. And typically they're funded either through direct contributions or through foundation support. Oftentimes they'll also compete for grants or contracts put out by local workforce boards or by the counties or by the state. Unfortunately, some of these programs essentially have solutions in search of problems in search of solutions. And so in order to be able to survive, you'll find a lot of these organizations out there, trying to conform to what is perceived to be the demand that is put out there in terms of money. The tragedy is that these are also the organizations that I think are the ones that are willing to fail at a project. They're willing to take on tough problems, find ways in which to address them, but along the way will find themselves failing. And we're the public systems are very much focused on success. You get paid for success. You don't get paid for innovation. You don't get paid for trying something that seemed like a good idea at the time and didn't work, but you learned a whole lot about it from the process. And so these NGOs, however, are critical to that. I mean, at one point I thought about starting a website and didn't, called Noble Failures. And the idea behind Noble Failures was to in fact document the times where these organizations and others have tried something different and have not made it work, but they learned something from it. And what is it that we can learn from that in the process? I've mentioned that there's been a shift significantly in responsibilities and put in terms of who's responsible for essentially bearing the cost of the workforce process. And then that's again been falling more and more on individuals. And I think one of the challenges that we'll have, that we see both locally and at the state level and at the national level, is that that a better partnership needs to come about. I'm just doing this as a little quick commercial here. That a better partnership needs to come about so that all those who are part of this bear a greater responsibility, and I'm thinking specifically in terms of the business community that actually benefits from the work that's done by the workforce system, and again, these NGOs. And then finally, we did a project a few years ago that was funded through the Department of Labor that we called Midwest Innovation Initiative. And it was an effort, this happened right at the end of the Bush administration. In fact, we got funded under Bush and we actually implemented under Obama. And it was during the time when we had the auto crisis. And our premise was, how do you build economies around the talent of the people who exist within these communities? So it's rather than saying, okay, let's get businesses in and try to conform to the business. The other way around is, well, what is it that people can do? What's the mix of talent? Iowa came up with a great analysis. They call them skill sheds. So if you think of watershed, it's a geographic area, but what it is, it's the skills of the people within the geographic area. And they were very successful, by the way, in using that and attracting the windmill industry to the state. But so our idea was, how do we bring this about? And so we ran a number of mini conferences around the Midwest. And one of the things I found fascinating was when we got the economic developers and the workforce developers together, the one thing they could actually, the way that we could get them to talk to each other is when we put out the challenge, how do you build wealth? How do you grow wealth in the community? And how do you narrow the gap of wealth within the community? And what are the policies and strategies that are used to do that? And so it brought about a very different kind of discussion in terms of what are the roles of these NGOs, what are the roles of the economic developers, what kinds of jobs will help to do that, and what kind of business patterns will help to do that. Is it through cooperatives? It's through greater use of employee stock ownership programs, other sorts of things that had ways in which people really could engage more on a collective basis. So I'm going to stop with that.
Okay. Thanks, Peter. Appreciate that. I'm going to turn it back now to Tor just for a second, because he offered, what was it? Looks like 6 kind of key success factors, right? Early intervention, holistic approach, more support and flexibility for special target groups, cooperation between various actors, fill in the gaps, and universal measures as ways to bring these partnerships into fruition. And I guess, Tor, I just want to kind of put you on the spot and say, from the discussion that we've had so far, have you heard much of, what have you heard, and, where is it lacking, I guess, or, where are we achieving it and where are we lacking this, some of these key success factors? And also at the same time, maybe you can just quickly, because I want to leave enough time for, so this is only 10 minutes among us here, so we can leave plenty of time for the audience to ask questions. But what about informal versus formal partnerships, relationships? Those that require MOUs or contracts versus, those that might be just, more informal. So anyway, some ideas. Just, you don't have to, be try to be coherent, but you don't have to make this definitive.
One thing that we have been thinking was lacking in Sweden, but we see a lot of our European neighboring countries and more here in the States too, among some states at least, as I know it, is that we have to work more together formally, more in one-stop shops where you gather different policy areas in the same organizations. Because as we see it, you work side by side, but you have people falling behind within the different systems. So if you can form more one-stop shops and have different policy areas working together, I think that would be one key success factor. And then I want to stress that what Scott talked about, gathering data. If we don't have the full picture of what this look like in the labor market, what people are, what kind of education or how far or how close they are to the labor market, it's very hard to also to get the right measures. Sweden is also a country like the US that we gather a lot of statistics and data among people, but we do also have a quite hard regulation how to use this data between different systems. So we can combine data from 2 or 3 policy areas to actually get the full picture. And of course that's an integrity issue, but it is also a problem if you want to create new policies. So that's something you have to balance on.
Let me kind of ask each of you sort of this spectrum between formal, which is contracts or MOUs would be a little bit up the line, to very informal, which would be, you just happen to share the same, goal, and you get together, informally around some pizza or something like that. Where do you find, your partnerships kind of along that spectrum? And do you think that's the optimal place for it? Why don't you go ahead, Tracy?
Sure. So I think that it is a spectrum, and so I think about the relationship that we're forming with LISC, which is the Local Initiative Support Corporation. LISC exists in a number of different communities across the country, and they operate centers that are focused on folks who are coming in with some very basic skills, remediation needs, and supports around just getting ready for the workforce. And they also, inside those centers, also deliver financial literacy services. And there's a direct tie to the work that workforce boards do in terms of connecting people into work readiness things like resume prep or job training programs, to this sort of entry-level support around basic skills remediation and financial literacy. And so it was a natural partnership. We don't have an MOU. We've just agreed to kind of work together in each local community, because how LISC operates and how the boards operate in each local community is unique and different. And so it didn't make sense to formalize that partnership. Then we look at a relationship that we've developed with the American Gear Manufacturers Association. That started out as a very informal relationship where we were sort of learning each other and kind of building out that partnership. And over the summer, it evolved to the point where we decided to create an actual MOU between Midwest Urban Strategies and the American Gear Manufacturers Association to talk about how those small and mid-sized businesses could connect into the local workforce systems where they're operating. Because a lot of those small and mid-sized businesses, they don't even have HR departments. They don't know how to connect to the public system. So through this industry association, it became a really good tool for us to connect through that association where they naturally find themselves attracted to and connect through that, so that those businesses who normally wouldn't find their way into the system have access to the resources.
Okay.
So there's just sort of two examples of ways that we do
thank
that.
Thank you. Scott, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would just say our partnerships, they're all over that spectrum,
Yeah,
but I
right.
think they evolve over time, right? I can remember when I moved back to Michigan about 4 years ago, you and I met up, just kind of a meet and greet. Here's
Right.
what's going on, right?
Yeah.
4 years later,
So they kind of evolve into
we've got
something more formal.
much more formal and a
Right.
much more defined project.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times these partnerships start in meetings just like this, right? And I think I would just encourage everyone, if you're curious, just the worst that's going to happen is somebody will say no, right? I mean, just ask. As Tor pointed out, and I should have said earlier, right, from one country to the next, the kind of data available to you, the laws around that data, it all varies, right? But you never know what you can do with it until you try. And a lot of times, right, there's misunderstandings. So if you just have those conversations, you can do some really good stuff.
Alejandro?
Yeah, I mean, I think like everybody, we have a range of, we sit on every aspect of that spectrum. NACO really relies heavily on informal relationship building and informal partnerships. A lot of our programming kind of takes up peer exchange and peer learning models, which are very informal relationships. But then when we do travel all the way to the more formal side of things, and we particularly act as advisors or technical assistants when it comes to drafting and formalizing those MOUs or contracts and procurement or whatever it is the counties are working on. We kind of lead a lot of work to be able to make sure that counties and the communities and residents that they serve are best benefiting from those MOUs. And really that line seems to come once money gets involved.
Yeah.
Like it goes from informal to formal the
Yeah.
soonest the moment, dollars get brought up.
Right. Peter?
I had my own epiphany as I was sitting here. I realized that we have 4 Midwesterners on this panel, which I think for Washington, D.C. will give everybody a nosebleed. Because that's something that people aren't used to around here, having 4 Midwesterners. I always think in terms, and our approach is to think in terms of networks. One of our areas that we're looking for, because the nature of this project that we're launching, which is community by community, is how do we bring it to scale? And you can do that through we envision peer-to-peer networks, but we also are peer-to-peer consultations, which is what Tracy's been talking about actually, but also through increased use of social network. And the reason why I brought up the Midwestern piece is that I also describe this as sort of a Midwestern strategy, because it is if you look at sort of the history of the progressive movement and dairy cooperatives and grain cooperatives and so forth that sprouted up, no pun intended, in dealing with basically how do you bring commodities to market and how you have individual farmers leverage that so that they can help to control some price and so forth. And doing it through cooperatives, that to me is sort of the example. of how do you begin to bring things to scale where you're dealing with multiple venues across large expanses. And so our vision on this and the way we're approaching it is how do we support that through social media, through other sorts of interactions that can help facilitate that sort of community-to-community interaction.
Right. Okay. Thank you. One reason I brought that up was that in some of the work we've been doing with OECD and others, it seems like there's some places that are so focused on formal relationships that by the time they get there, all of the energy is sort of wrung out of that relationship, and there's not much left. And those that say, okay, let's just kind of get together with a pizza or something, then does it fall apart? How do you stay together? And so I think that's an important issue, and it depends on the topic, depends on what you're trying to address. But good answers to that. I'm going to open it up to the audience now, or everybody out here, okay? And wait for the microphone to come to you, or you go to the microphone, okay? Because we have to have the translators hear what you're saying. Okay, so we got one right now. Great, thank you.
Buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Grecia Logroño, soy de Ecuador, de la Red Socioempleo, que es la bolsa pública del Ecuador. Tenía dos preguntas, una para Alejandra. Alejandra, tú eres de la Asociación Nacional de Condados. Allá en Ecuador, pienso que el par de esta asociación sería la Asociación de Municipalidades del Ecuador. Mi pregunta va direccionada en este sentido. ¿Cómo evitar que la empresa privada sienta que hay una intromisión de los gobiernos locales en temas de empleabilidad de la región en la que está ese gobierno local? Te comento por qué. Allá en Ecuador tenemos una zona que es la zona amazónica. Hay un acuerdo de ley preferente de empleo donde te dicen que un porcentaje de tu nómina de nuevos contratados debe ser de esa mano local. Eso ha generado obviamente que en las empresas haya esta inconformidad del cumplimiento, porque te dicen que no hay la mano de obra calificada para ese sector de la actividad económica. Entonces, los alcaldes han tomado una posición muy impositiva. Entonces, en este sentido, cuando tú hablabas de eso, me parecía interesante ver cómo aquí en Estados Unidos se ha logrado que esto lo vean como apoyo, más no como imposición.
You going to help us out with?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
I am your traveling
Yeah.
translator, guys.
Yeah.
So she mentioned that in Ecuador, there's a region in the Amazon where their local companies open up shop, but the law is requiring them to have a certain percentage of local workforce. As they're saying it has to be, it's not a encouragement. So what, you guys here in the U.S. have been able to accomplish them seeing it more as like an investment and a joint partnership versus a must by law. The companies in that area are saying we don't want to do it because there's not enough of that trained workforce in that area. So what are some suggestions that you may have to make sure that it's seen more as a partnership and not an obligation?
Okay, good. Everybody understand? Yeah. Great.
I mean, that's a huge challenge. I think one of the ways that we work with the counties because again, NACO does not do the regulating or kind of make these kind of policies. We help our counties make those policies and support that system. Different counties are going to work really differently at this. There are no requirements or laws on how they're going to get companies to work together on workforce development. But for example, I think we can, a different Amazon, but we can use a similar kind of example here in the DC area, but particularly in Seattle, in Kings County. The way that they're creating partnerships and using local government, a combination of local government, community-based organization and NGOs, the education systems there, partnering with high schools, community colleges and universities, they're able to encourage their partnerships and relationships with this particular company, with Amazon, to be able to develop employees that are ready at all levels. So there's the entry-level positions in terms of distribution and factory workers. There's high-skilled workers on the tech side and everything, and then leadership and CEO. Not that CEO is open. That's not an open position, but I think there's opportunities, and they're working across the system to encourage all of that. Now, it's certainly not a perfect system, and local governments and counties in particular have very limited authority there. And so part of this is kind of like people power and the ability to negotiate, influence, and encourage people to be a part of that system. It is not a requirement. But I think one of the best ways, and my recommendation, this is not necessarily every county's way, is to energize that demand. The workers and the people, the residents of our counties and our local municipalities are really in need of of representatives that are going to support these workforce systems. And so if enough people get together, if we are seeing movements of workers saying, like, these are the workforce systems that we need, I think that's going to encourage the policymakers and those in the business community and on the policy side to be able to make those changes. Certainly not fast, or, it's a very slow process, slow-moving process. But those movements, and we're seeing that shift because of the way that workers are demanding changes in terms of living wage, in terms of workplace culture, in terms of, so many ways that we're seeing shifts in our working styles. Yeah. And I can open this up to other people. This doesn't have to be.
I think Tracy has a comment.
Yeah, so we do have, I've had a bit of experience with work requirements specifically on development projects in a number of the cities that are part of Midwest Urban Strategies. And so I don't think it's fair to say that any of those contractors who were coming in were, throwing a party about the idea that they had work requirements put upon them in order to get these contracts. But what I've seen evolve over time, and it really does require a strong partnership between the whatever the governing municipality is, whether it's a city or a county or a state, and the workforce board or workforce system, the community college system, and that contractor and sort of the industry itself. That partnership has to be brought together in the right way. And there needs to be supports put in place that help those employers to accomplish those objectives. So specifically, working with them to understand what their training needs are. One example of this we did in Milwaukee, the Northwestern Mutual Tower, and if they heard me say that, I'd be in trouble because it's the NM Tower, not Northwestern Mutual, but we all call it Northwestern Mutual. That building was really tall, like 70 stories tall or something like that. And so one of the companies that bid on it was having trouble, the window glazing company was having trouble getting its workforce requirements because they didn't want to take the risk of putting really not journey level workers in a place where they're installing windows on a building that would put them at risk. So what they did was they came to the city, to the mayor's office, and said, help us figure this out because we're not going to meet our contractual obligations. And we want to, but we don't know how. So what we developed together was a training program that allowed them to use an unused building in the central part of Milwaukee, and they did fabrication of windows on site. So they were learning how those windows all went together and building the windows. Now that usually would have happened off-site at a different location in another county far, far away. But they brought that operation into the city so that people could do those jobs and learn how that construction of windows came together. And then the journey level workers were the ones who actually put it on the buildings. So they were able to count that as their credit. So it was through that partnership and that conversation that allowed that company to meet its priorities and its objectives for the contract, which it wanted to do. And really help the community in a number of ways. So that business is continuing to build windows in that same facility, and it's learned that it can diversify its workforce in a way that it didn't know that before. And it starts to see then the return on investment as a result of that diversification. Mm-hmm. So you have to build it. It takes time. Yeah. And those partnerships really, they have to be organically developed. And when people are having problems, they have to feel safe enough to come to the table and have a conversation and trust the team to help them solve that problem rather than just come with a hammer and hit them over the head with it.
Tor?
Yeah, I know the United Kingdom have a similar system where you do public procurements. You have to employ some of the unemployed people within the local region, but they also combine with the labor market program and education program, so the unemployed could meet the needs for the companies. So they work both from the, I think it's at the state level in the UK, to supply labor with the right skills as well. But that has functioned quite well, I think, in the UK. I'm not so into it in details, but
Yeah. I think research shows that when you have some type of economic development initiative like that, many of the workers come from outside the area instead of helping those that are inside the area. So you want to make sure you have a nice balance there. Another question, please. Okay, don't all rush at once to Charlie. Charlie's back there with the microphone. Okay, uh-oh. Yeah.
Se asustaron de mis preguntas. La segunda, más que una pregunta, es un comentario de lo que mencionó Peter. Nosotros en Ecuador estamos trabajando tanto con la empresa privada como con ONGs en el desarrollo de programas para mujeres en cargos no tradicionales. Tenemos un proyecto con Holcim, que es una cementera, con la cual se está desarrollando un programa que se llama Supérate, donde es un programa de 6 meses, solamente para mujeres, para que adquieran todos los conocimientos y técnicas en la construcción. Pasan los 6 meses y las mejores punteadas, que tienen mejores puntos, tienen obviamente una vacante de lo que Holcim hace. Y las que no, pasan a formar parte de nuestra bolsa pública de empleo para que puedan ser empleables en otra empresa. Lo mismo también estamos haciendo con una empresa que es Interagua, que es la que administra el agua potable en Guayaquil. Lo mismo, es una escuela de operadoras. Le enseñan mecánica, asimismo 6 meses, y luego tienen obviamente el empleo. Y con ONGs, también con Children International, ellos obviamente tienen un programa hacia la empleabilidad juvenil. Son niños apadrinados de situación vulnerable bien difícil allá en el país, los apadrinan obviamente Children. Cuando ya tienen la edad de trabajar, los preparan en diferentes competencias y técnicas, y luego esas personas, esos jóvenes, forman parte de nuestra bolsa pública para contratarlos obviamente en compañías que forman parte de nuestra red. Quería hacer ese comentario.
Hello. She just wanted to comment. So in Ecuador, they have a program that they're doing with women, specifically women in construction industry. They have an enterprise called Holcim, which is a cement company, and they do a 6-month training program, getting the women into a particular work area that they're not accustomed to and they're not known in that area. And within those 6 months, they gain a certain amount of points in which they will be able to get the knowledge and the technical capabilities. After the 6 months, if there is a vacancy, they take on that role. And then the ones who have not at least have the experience that they could take on to the public employment services as a whole. And they're doing something similar with some other ONGs in the area, but she wanted just to kind of mention that in relation to what Peter mentioned, which, I'm sorry, Peter, I missed what you said, but it must have been related to that.
Okay, we have one more question. Yeah, one more. Okay, I got 2 minutes left, Charlie. Yeah, one more question. Here we go. Okay. Is this another?
If it's not Spanish, I don't know French.
Yeah. Okay.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le modérateur. Moi, c'est Briman Mali Sidibé de l'Agence nationale pour l'emploi du Mali, ANPE Mali. Nous sommes très intéressés par le développement de ces partenariats locaux, mais nous avons, je peux dire, une expérience en la matière qui n'a pas très bien réussi, puisque nous avons tablé d'abord sur des partenariats locaux formalisés en signant une convention de partenariat avec l'Association des municipalités du Mali depuis 2006, mais nous voyons que les collectivités qui doivent être des partenaires incontournables dans la formation des ressources humaines, dans la promotion de l'emploi au niveau des collectivités ne sont pas très pressées de collaborer. Et donc, est-ce à dire que nous avons fait le mauvais choix en optant pour des partenariats formalisés? Est-ce nos experts qui sont là peuvent nous dire s'il faut, en la matière, privilégier le pragmatisme, c'est-à-dire en allant au contact direct, même s'il n'y a pas de support formalisé, se mettre d'accord sur des projets, programmes, même si ça ne repose sur aucun support formel, et s'engager en tant que service public d'emploi. Ou, parce que depuis 2006, les collectivités qui ont accepté de s'engager avec nous, ça ne dépasse pas 3 à l'échelle du pays. Donc je voudrais savoir où est-ce qu'il y a le blocage à l'aune des expériences des pays qui sont là. Merci.
Thank you very much. I'm representing the workforce agency in Mali, I believe I heard. We are interested in further information on how to formalize partnerships, since our efforts at formalizing local partnerships didn't really succeed. We've tried since 2006, and we really don't see businesses running to participate in this program, rushing to participate, and we have a hard time promoting this, and we're wondering how these partnerships were able to get off the ground, since it hasn't worked very well for us.
Well, that's a good question to end with. I'm not sure if we have enough time for a good answer, but it is a very important question. And I think one thing that we found in this country was that, we had the informal partnerships, and then finally they were beginning to codify into legislation, which is now codified into the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. I think this is a conversation that should be sort of a sidebar after we all break here, but I think we'll have much more to say at other times too. So anyway, I want to end our session right now, the panel, and thank everybody for coming, and please help me thank the panel for all their insights.